society and the impacts that it's actually having on our team members and our workplaces and communities. Some staggering statistics that just continue to grow all around disengagement and dissatisfaction inside of our workplaces. But the other statistic that's kind of scary is work can be the leading cause of stress for us, and that our supervisor has more impact on our health than our primary care physician, and how much distrust is actually happening in our workplaces. And this all comes down to leadership. We have individuals in our span of care for 40 hours a week or more. And so that impact ripples through our workplaces, our families, and our communities. So at the Chapman Foundation, we really worked to give leaders the skills and courage to care, uh, because we imagine a society where we can be our own solution as we work through this framework in building leaders. I think it is important to know our leadership philosophy that everyone has the capacity for leadership. It is not a role or a function on an org chart. It truly is how, as individuals, do we show up and lead those in our span of care, lead our coworkers, and even lead the leaders that are above us through the leadership behaviors that we teach in our courses. So I want to welcome you here today to really dive into what is this new movement and how do we create caring workplaces that ultimately will help us create caring communities and drive the social change that we want to be seeing. And so that is through that Caring Workplaces and Caring Community program. We know that you on the screen are the early adopters. We know that you already understand that organizations can be this true force of good, which allows us to get into our communities. And this is how we are going to change those statistics that are looking at us every single day. So the way that we work on building community is through some focus areas, and we really work in the nonprofit sector. I won't say that we never work with businesses, but our focus is on those nonprofits in our communities because they're already doing the community development work. And they already have the networks for collaboration. So we work in healthcare, military, education, local government, which would include policing and fire, and then also all of the other for good organizations that are in our communities. As we're working with those partner organizations, what we're really trying to do is build this collective impact movement, because it takes all of the individual work that is kind of scattered and makes us start to be pointing in the same direction so we can really get to that tipping point in a community to be able to see that change. As I mentioned, this collective impact framework is what we're working on and trying to get all of the organizations to move forward with together. So having a common agenda, understanding that leadership and leadership development is the key piece that can help us transform our families, our communities, and our workplaces. We also have shared measurement. So it's not just one organization working on this, but we can show that collective impact and the data from multiple organizations coming together and offering these programs. We also have reinforcing activities through all of our continuous learning and opportunities for us to get together. And then we also offer this backbone support. So we'll get into it in a little bit later, but we do have investment dollars that can help you go along this path. We also have a huge team that helps you as you embark on this, which we'll dive into a little bit later. So what is a caring workplace and what is a caring community and why do I care, right? So first, our Caring Workplace program consists of these several buckets. The first one is the implementation of our foundational courses of Our Community Listens, Our Community Serves, and Our Community Transforms. And I will dive into it a little bit deeper on what are those and how do they make an impact in our organization in a moment. But then the second piece is we're really looking at the integration of some critical behaviors and making sure there's supports and frameworks that really will embed them into the organization. And those are our 5 pillars of caring leadership, which I'll unpack in the next slide. We also have surveys and data and metrics to help support you along on this journey and to be able to show you the evolution of your workforce and seeing how those scores are really starting to increase as you implement the foundational courses. And then, of course, the continuous learning and ongoing support that is available. These are our 5 pillars of caring leadership, and this is what we really focus in on embedding into the organization. And you'll see that they are kind of intertwined too. So as you work on one, the other ones will start to increase. But when you're going through our Caring Workplace program, we suggest that you focus on 2 of these pillars in the first year. And we highly recommend culture of learning because that's naturally going to happen as you implement our Listen, Serves, and Transforms curriculum. But also focusing in on like we are all developing together. We're all trying these skills together. And that one then has an impact on the trust in your organization naturally. And then the second pillar that we recommend in the first year is recognition and celebration. This really is a pillar for our organization too, but what this does is allows everyone in your workplace to know that their work matters, that they are seen, valued, and heard. And so as we look at what are we going to recognize, their effort, their example, or their excellence in these situations and helping us move the Caring Workplace program forward. The next 3 pillars are really up to you and your organization of what do you want to focus on, what do you want to tackle, and a lot of the times we can use that data points of our pulse surveys to help us understand where should we be focusing in on. So it might be intentionally connecting with those in your span of care, building trust, or meaningful work. And I can show you in just a moment in how our community transforms does help us in each of these pillar areas. So to get to the caring community designation, this again is through that collective impact framework, but what we're looking for is a select number of anchor institutions that will go after the caring workplace designation. And then they collaboratively offer listens and serves to community members. So we have some organizations that are already doing this in Colorado in the Roaring Fork Valley, but we're also identifying other communities across the US that can follow this same model. Anchor or institution is what I really want to dive into for just a second, but these are the organizations that already have the reach into community, already have some of the supportive resources that can really help embed that program inside of that community. Because there are a lot of benefits for workplaces that choose to do this. So internally, we have seen this with all of our partners that we're working with, increase in member satisfaction, engagement. They have a professional development track, conflict lowers because we now have the communication skills to be able to do it better. Then externally, it helps with brand awareness for your organization and building community and trust because you are inviting the team members into those classes where they're feeling the change from your organization. So we've seen a lot of great benefits there with the program. We do have some supports available for you if you choose to embark on this journey with us. We have a full support team for you. We know that this is not the only work you're doing. You're already doing amazing work in the community, so we never want to be a burden. We truly want to be a support, and how can we help you? And understanding that each organization will be on its own timeline. They will be customizing the program to fit their needs. So we have our Caring Communities Director, which is Mickey, and she introduced us this morning. We also have our Caring Workplace Logistics Leader. So that is Steph in the blue there. She's amazing with all of the details. She just listens to Mickey and I and our partners, and she can build that plan for us. She really has an eye for detail. And then we also have our programming and logistics support. So helping you get those classes built and off the ground and running smoothly. As I mentioned, we will also have the data and metrics support collection and support. We have certain investment support packages and then the integration of the concepts into your programs. So the data and metrics, each partner will have their own personal dashboard to be looking at and to be seeing the results of the data and metrics that are collected. There's two pieces that we collect. The first one is based upon the curriculum. So as soon as individuals come out of any of the programs, we have a survey tool that helps us monitor and determine like how much of a knowledge gain did they have, and then what is their motivation to actually implement these skills. Because what we're seeing with our data is still 5 years later, people are still using the skills taught in our Listens program. It is just not another program that you go to and then it sits on the file cabinet or in your bookshelf. It really is creating long-term lasting change for us. And then second, we have the organizational side of it. So looking at those pulse surveys and engagement and satisfaction scores, and really looking at, are they feeling meaning and purpose? Are they feeling that sense of belonging? And that's that connection to their leaders. I also want to acknowledge that this journey that we'll be going on together is not about getting to that designation of a caring workplace. What this is, it's all about the process and how we make those in our span of care feel as we have to have tough conversations. We know in business, the tough conversations will never end, right? We're all human. So we have to understand that coaching mindset and how do we have that process that really keeps our relationships intact while we have to have hard decisions. So it's all about the journey instead of that end destination. Now I'm going to go a little bit into the educational framework of our curriculum and how it works, and then I'll talk about Listens, Serves, and Transforms. So our impact framework that we utilize is a me, we, and us model from positive psychology. Our first foundational course, our community listens, is all about the individual, all about how do we have better relationships and connections by learning the communication skills needed to be able to have open dialogue and even go into confrontation in a way that preserves the relationship. From there, we go to our community serves, which takes us to that we component. And this is where we're really focusing in on how do we shift our cultures from me-centric to we-centric through our leadership behaviors. And then finally, we have our community transforms, which is the us component and really focuses in on building better organizations and organizational development. How do we teach leaders that are in this class to create those environments for flourishing? And so we really focus in on with Listens, Serves, and Transforms on developing leaders in two ways. The first one is to build emotional intelligence. And it is throughout the three programs that we really dive into that. And then second, how do we teach leaders how to create caring environments for well-being and flourishing? So our foundational courses, as I mentioned, Listens, Serves, and Transforms. I think most on the call that I recognized have had a little bit of engagement, at least with our community listens. And this is our 3-day class where, again, it's all about communication skills. We learn about ourselves, our behavioral tendencies, how to identify behavioral tendencies in others, and then have strategies to communicate with them better. On day 2, we learn about reflective listening and empathy and acceptance versus agreement, which can be a critical skill for us in today's society. And then day 3 is all about effective confrontation and how do we do that? How do we simply have a conversation to get the needs met of us or the organization, all while recognizing the individual change process that we're asking people to go through when we confront them. From there is then our community serves, which is a 2-day class experience. And again, shifting cultures from me-centric to we-centric with our leadership behaviors. And so there are 3 service mindsets that we really dive into. The first service mindset is emotional awareness, understanding what are our emotional catalysts, what are our emotions and feelings telling us, and how do we slow down enough to actually use that in our leadership and help those in our span of care. Service mindset number 2 is perception. So understanding that each of us has a very unique lens that we see the world through. And that lens is built from our Past experiences, our behavioral tendencies, how we were brought up, cultural impacts. So understanding that, well, I might see something one way, somebody else has a completely different lens and might be experiencing that same situation very differently. And how do we have conversations around it? Going into day 2, we then wrap up our mindsets with accountability. We have 5 destructive behaviors that we have as humans, and how do we shift those to accountability behaviors? And really making sure we're not gossiping, throwing blame, all 5 different behaviors that we really dive into. And then finally, we wrap up with the service cycle. So when we say service, it's not about community service or volunteer service. It's all about how do we take action to meet the needs of someone else? And that it could be in our span of care, in the community, and allowing us to set clear expectations and closing the loop with them, because that adds to that we-centric environment that we're trying to create. And then the third and final piece of our foundational programming is our Community Transforms. This is a virtual cohort experience. It is meant and designed for leaders that have the ability to affect change in your organization, either through policies, procedures, but really being able to bring these trainings into your organization. So we always start with, let's learn a little bit more about ourselves. So we talk about values-based leadership, and then we start focusing in on our teams and our organization of how do we find purpose and meaning for those in our span of care? How do we build trust? What is psychological safety? How do we add to it? How are we not creating an environment for safety? From there, we talk about growing people. This is all about situational feedback and being able to talk to those in our span of care of what went wrong, how do we do it better? But again, through that lens of always protecting the relationship as we have those hard conversations. Session number 4 and session number 5 are really tools that can help us along this movement. So session number 4 is all about organizational storytelling. How do we as leaders tell stories to help move the mission and the vision of the organization forward? And also, how do we move the caring workplace forward? How do we get our teams excited about that journey? And then session number 5 is an organizational change model. And how do we see the individual gifts and talents as we're walking through this path of change? And the final piece of this is coaching sessions. You will learn coaching skills, and then you will do peer-to-peer coaching where you get to coach somebody in practice, but then you also receive that coaching. That coaching component is critically important as we're implementing all of those 5 pillars of caring leadership.
Misty, can I interrupt and ask you a question?
Yes, of course.
With the coaching session, does that happen within your cohort, or is that something that's happening within the organization that you're representing?
It happens inside the cohort. So the
Okay.
cohorts have been bonding really well, and they can hear from other sectors because sometimes our problems are very similar. And so
Sure.
it's great to have a different perspective or lens outside of the organization.
Okay.
I will say we typically ask for a couple of people from an organization to go through this class together so they can really then do the capstone of the course on how are we doing this? How are we integrating it? And it's not just going to sit on a shelf. Thank you for asking. All right. From there, as I mentioned before, we never want to have something just sit on a shelf and never use again. So after the foundational courses and those skill trainings, we also have skills application, taking one of the skills from the courses and making sure we can answer any questions that you might have or take that concept a little bit deeper. But it's all about, let's give you room to practice and put into application the skills that you've learned so you can retain them. And then you'll see we have lots of learning supports available. We have an app that shows you any of the upcoming continuous learning opportunities. We have on-demand learning, a lot of great resources to just, again, continue to help you through that continuum of learning. All right, investment support and timeline. We are almost to the end, and then you can ask even more questions. But for this, we do have investment support available to organizations that they want to take on this designation. It does vary by your organization, how many people, what is your potential impact. Like we said, we know no organization is the same, so we really customize this to meet the needs of you and your organization. But it is important to note here, we are looking for partners that aren't just chasing the dollars, that really want to impact their workplace, but also their community too. And so when we see that in these applications, that's kind of how we start to identify where our investment is going to be and have the biggest impact. All right, Mickey, can you help us with the timeline of what's happening as we roll this out?
Absolutely. So you can see here, now we are in June, you're participating in the webinar. Sometime either this afternoon or tomorrow, what you're going to get from my email directly is a recording of the webinar so you can share it with other leaders or watch it again for your own benefit. You will also get the application for this round and this cohort. You can start working on those applications right away. There is no doubt in my mind that if you're doing the application, you're going to stumble upon some questions, pieces we've made it as easy as possible, but maybe you just think, I just don't know how to answer this question. Stephanie and I are here to answer those questions, and she will be copied on those emails that I send to you. In my email signature, you will see, of course, my email, but also my cell phone. Please feel free to text, call, email with any questions you have. Those applications are due August 1st. What happens in August, after we make our selections, is Steph and I, Misty and Katie as well, will start to look at the scope of the project that it would take to onboard you if you're selected into the Caring Workplace project. That looks drastically different for everyone in the current cohort that we are supporting. We have organizations that are 50 employees. We have organizations that are over 400 employees. Also, the timeline and the cadence of the courses and the continuous learning can look very different based on the work they're doing. We have an organization, multiple organizations actually in the current cohort. One of them is a fire department. So we're talking about first responders that have shift difficulties and how we work around that. Then what will happen as we sort of shake out the cadence, the project scope, is we'll also work on what the budget for the project in at least year one would be, and maybe even into year two. That gives you and I a chance to look at, here's what the total budget for those years would look like. Here's what the investment between our organization and yours, that combination of investment could look like. And where do we need to tweak things to just make those numbers make sense for both parties? As we start to talk about budget, we're going to work with you and think about things like in-kind contributions. You would be surprised on the cost of a class, how much of the cost might be a training venue. For example, when we do a class and we have to rent a hotel and organize catering, that's a very large chunk of a class cost. So if you have a training venue, you have other in-kind supports, that will contribute towards those that budget tweaking as we go. In addition, sometimes we have partners that have trained facilitators with us inside their organizations, or sometimes they want to do that in year one or year two. And that, of course, lifts some of that budget off of the shoulders of both organizations as well. If you're selected and we work through that budget process, then in September and October, we're going to start to work on integration plans and programming. So we'll start to look at cadence. What programs do you need right away? Start to grab those first pulse surveys. This is the place also, I mean, really throughout the whole process, and particularly this spot where we're really personalizing the program for your organization. We have organizations that come in and almost all of their employees have already been through listens. That's very different than an organization of 400 that says we have 3 alumni of listens. Those two journeys are very, very different. We don't want the journey to be a burden to you, like Misty said. Stephanie and I typically meet with the partners about once a month in the beginning, and there's some emailing that goes back and forth. We get into about month 4 or 5, and then we're just meeting about every other month. The programming and the cohort will launch sometime for you between November and January, and then you'll be off and running.
All right. So hopefully, I know that can be really like, how does it actually look? But the journey for every organization is so different. And that's why this customizable piece and the individual conversations, if you're interested after this, are really important. Because what we're really looking to do is how do we change society one relationship at a time? Now is the time to do this. We know our employees and team members are demanding it from us. So I'm very excited that you are here today to help move this vision and movement forward. So as you can see, the next steps, if you are interested, is just to respond to Mickey's email, letting her know that you're going to be putting in an application, and then make sure we hit that application close deadline of August 1st.